Chapter 12. The sun hung low in the sky as the car drew up in front of Gistajo's. Kayla had spent most of the ride back from Blade's Edge meditating and preparing herself for her arrival. The Metedador, Gaurun, had once served under Thelkar, but now served under Corbajani. After Thelkar had been forced to fake his own death, his forces had been divided between the remaining two branches of Project Acorn. Half went to Vorshana, the others were given to the old Terran-hating serpent. Corbajani had been directed to pass his position to Gaurun and go take direct charge of the rebellion on the Chalig homeworld, Tazalam. He disobeyed both orders, but there hadn't been anyone left on Hyrule who could force him to do anything. Kayla was quietly pleased that she'd be the one to put him in his place. She owed it to the young woman from whom she'd inherited her ship. She'd quickly become friends with Thalu, and owed the woman her life. The old serpent had forced the woman to betray Kayla in order to keep her younger sister safe from Corbajani's allies. The cobra-like fiend was more feared than respected, and for good reason. His vast combat experience and training, in addition to a powerful knack for the use of Kobe-Tomj, had elevated him to the pinnacle of Project Acorn's hierarchy. He was an assassin, not a tactician. Kayla had suspected the attempt to reassign him to Tazalam was intended to reduce the depths of his impact upon the ranks of Acorn. The title she'd been given was enough to garner respect and compliance from most Alliance affiliates. Project Acorn was a clear exception. They had been founded for the purpose of guiding, subverting, and even overthrowing governments. Influential names bore little weight among people who had spent decades rendering the powerful impotent. If she wanted their support, she'd have to prove herself worthy, and taking down Corbajani was the most direct path to that end. She hadn't brought any weapons and was wearing armor that clearly wasn't built for a serious fight. If it wasn't for Corbajani's blatant racism, her chances of success would be negligible. Her greatest assets were his overconfidence and bigotry. Her narrow path to success was dependent on being underestimated by him. Appearing unprepared for a confrontation was key to ensuring that perception. The offense of wearing armor that resembled his own scaly hide should reduce his ability to critically analyze the situation. "I have everything I need," Kayla said as she slid her stinger through a rubber valve on top of the bottle filled with the toxin that cyanide's contact had provided for her. She slowly filled her venom sac. "I don't produce my own," Kayla explained to Shinji, "so I just load it with what I need." She'd spent much of her night with cyanide planning for this confrontation, but as the moment drew nearer, she found herself struggling with doubts. In a protracted battle, she'd fail. His defeat had to be swift and decisive. Corbajani could only access Kobe-Tomj, but he was faster, stronger, and far more experienced than she was. Kayla could use any of the three dominant forms of mystic arts, but that wouldn't do her any good if she didn't have the time to activate any of those abilities. She trained alongside the Val Kren Gen O for 4 years, but was never truly their equal. Her advantage then, as now, had to be through tactics, not power alone. "We can do this," Kayla thought to reassure herself. "She's here," Kivaza thought eagerly. "Everything is in place." Kayla closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let her fears and doubts flow away from her as she exhaled. "What are we waiting for?" Shinji asked quietly. "The changing of the guard," she said. "Why? You're just checking in tonight, aren't you?" "No, I plan on starting a fight." "You're serious," he said in alarm. "With whom?" "Corbajani," she said with a cruel grin. "Oh," Shinji said with a heavy sigh of relief, "I thought you meant an actual fight." "I do," Kayla said with renewed determination. "Please, tell me this isn't what you meant when you were talking about having to deal with him," Shinji said nervously. "While I've never personally seen what Corbajani's capable of, I know the other members of Acorn are terrified of him. Even scares the Drudge. Please reconsider. I know exactly what Corbajani is capable of, and you've seen what I can do." I saw the aftermath from when you were attacked at the mall, but that's different. From all I've heard, he's a whole different sort of deadly. This isn't a decision I've made lightly. I'm going with you, he insisted. No. I don't know that I could be much help, but at least let me come with you, he pleaded. Korbajani is the first branch of the great oak. Shivar is the root of that branch, and he's been missing for a while now. This has left the old snake with far too much influence. I need for him to bow down before me. What will you do if he refuses to acknowledge you? Kayla scoffed. I don't plan to give him a choice in the matter. If he doesn't bow before me, I intend to kill him. I'm not going to let you go in there alone. Kayla tilted her head and smiled warmly. That's very sweet, but no. You would be a variable that could prove to be a liability. I've only seen glimpses of this side of you, Shinji said. I've seen the sweet, stern, vulnerable, and a whole lot of sexy, but I really don't know this side of you. If you don't want me to worry about you, at least let me see what Lady Darkseid is truly capable of. It's safer out here, Kayla said coldly. I'll keep my distance, he insisted. Sitting out here, not knowing if I could have helped, is so much worse than being in there and seeing that there's nothing I can do. Kayla saw a Gorgalian walking toward the front of the building. In a moment, one of his two brothers would meet him at the door and take his place. The three brothers shared a single soul, each with a different talent. She'd hoped Ord, the psionicist, would be taking the next shift. She narrowed her eyes so she could see the energies flowing around them. The only way to tell the brothers apart was based on their mystic talent. Chow will be replacing Bala tonight. She could see a faint wisp of blue connecting the brothers, which grew thicker as they moved closer to one another. She'd have to meet them both at the door. It was time to move. If you want to open my door, Kayla said, you'll need to do it quickly. Shinji rushed out of the car and ran around to open her door. She turned toward the open door, rested her bare feet on the ground, and stood up with her head held high. Why did you take off your shoes? Shinji asked. She silenced him with a glance as she started walking toward the front of Gestajos, with her tails dragging lazily behind her. She drew up near Chow and maintained a distance of 5 paces behind the Gorgalian. She could hear Shinji's footsteps behind her. Go back to the car, she thought. Not a chance, he thought back forcefully. She needed to maintain her concentration, and couldn't afford the distraction of an argument. If you get in trouble, Kayla said callously, I won't help you. I'm not waiting in the car while you risk your life. Kayla walked over to the two brothers. The Gorgalian's forearms were thicker than her chest, and their molars were roughly the size of her fist. They stood before her, each 9 feet tall and 6 feet wide. Hello, Bala, Chow. How's Ord? Kayla said with a warm smile. Both brothers immediately took a defensive posture. Bala took one look at her tails and spoke to her as if making an accusation, popcorn. I'm not a changeling, Kayla scoffed. Then, what are you? Chow asked. Kayla smiled, but couldn't hide her murderous intent. Why are you here? Bala asked. I'm here to break the coiled branch, she said with a vicious grin. The brothers exchanged glances, clearly not sure what to do. Are you boys going to let me pass? She said in a bored tone, or do I have to invoke the Mahatarsahig? I'm really not that hungry, but if you're going to insist. Both of us? Chow asked, and then they both let out a deep, hearty laugh. Kayla stepped forward and held out her arms, with her palms facing the ground and her elbows pointing outward. Well? Their laughter stopped abruptly. The Mahatarsahig honor duel is single combat, to the death, Bala said angrily. Kayla lowered her arms. He's not challenging you, she said as she motioned toward Shinji, who was standing a few feet behind her. Just me. You're bluffing, Chow scoffed. So, which of you would like to face me first? Kayla asked with a feral glare. Bala rested his hand on his brother's arm and said, I'm not sensing any deception from her. Who are you? Chao asked. Answer him, she thought to Shinji. You must not announce my arrival, she said sternly to the brothers. She is Lady Darkseid, Shinji said. Fear shone brightly in his eyes. The two Gorgalians lowered their bodies before her as they bowed, with their heads stretched forward parallel to the walkway, so low their necks nearly touched the ground. Kayla stepped between them, glanced over her shoulder at Shinji, and said, Stop dawdling. He rushed through the door just behind her. Sit quietly in a corner somewhere, she thought as she strode into the main hall. Evening, princess, she felt Cyan's thoughts caress her mind. The first time she'd come to Gestasio's, it had been a restaurant with a hunter's lodge motif. After the siege of Hyrule, it had been converted into a data center to coordinate the movements of the Alliance forces. Gao Run had redesigned it again. The back section still had a handful of operatives at work on terminals, but the kitchen and front rooms had been restored, mostly, to their former state. The bar, which had once been in the back section, had been moved to the far right of the entrance. A clear wall separated the front area from the back. Korbajani, as usual, was sitting alone with his hands resting on one end of the bar. Kayla hesitated for a moment. It had been so long since she'd last seen him. The massive hooded serpent's thick coils churned beneath him. The bony spines on his skull shifted slightly as his cobra-like hood extended and contracted. The dense interlocking carapace covering his back made faint scratching noises against the ground as the Chalig's long tail moved against the tiled floor. The glistening rainbow hues of his tail showed the vast combat experience he'd faced. Much like with the scales of a Talgrodon, the coloration had been altered each time he'd been struck. As her eyes narrowed, she could see a crimson glow coursing through his entire body. He had turned to face her, his hooded neck fully extended, and drops of poison dripped from his fangs. She knew he could spit that poison the full 30-foot length of his body. Kayla smirked as she remembered facing a Rashrai and even a pair of changelings. She could do this. She'd faced far more menacing opponents, and this time she wasn't alone even if she couldn't acknowledge cyanide right now. Your clothing offends me, Terran, Korbajani said. The word was a curse on his lips. Kayla slapped her tail solidly against the floor as she stepped toward him. We need to talk, worm, she said in a loud, authoritarian tone. Korbajani finished his drink, then flexed his powerful arms as he hissed, Tell me who you are, Terran, so I'll know what it is that I'll be eating. I am the first branch, Kayla bellowed. The coiled branch has withered, and will be cut down. Fool Terran, he hissed, as he coiled his body underneath himself, preparing to strike. The patrons swiftly moved their chairs and tables out of the path between them. She could feel fear pulsating through the room, yet none of them feared her, yet. When I defeat you, Kayla commanded, you will relinquish your position here and command the rebels on Taslim to release their prisoners. You have refused the commands of your betters for too long, and I have come to enforce the will of the oak. The energy within a green soul stone flared just at the edge of her perception. Kayla ignored the laughter which flooded through the room. She was the only one present capable of perceiving the trap Cyan had prepared. What do you know of my home? Korbajani bellowed so loudly it felt as if the walls were trembling. You dare speak of Taslim while dressed like that? You will bow before me, Kayla said confidently, or I will wear your hide in its place. Korbajani struck out at her, with all the speed and precision only a snake could. The ground between them liquefied as Kayla jumped. His arms reached for her, but she was already beyond his grasp. He tried to break free as his heavy body sank into the floor. Lightning raced through her from deep within. Her electrified brown tails coiled around his fangs, pulling his head backwards as her black tail stung the back of his throat. His combat empathy had proven useless against appendages over which she had no conscious control. He attempted to move away, but the floor solidified with most of his body trapped within it. Her tails moved away from his head, swirling around her as she kicked off from the top of it. Corbijani was trapped, with over 20 feet of his body and one of his arms embedded within the stone floor. She stood behind him as he attempted to turn to face her. "My stinger was drugged," Kayla said with a cruel grin. "It's an opiate that has paralytic properties. You won't be able to concentrate well enough to use Kobitomj to free yourself." She used telekinesis to force his upper body and head flat onto the floor as she walked around to face him. The room had gone deathly silent except for her quiet footfalls, a soft hissing from deep within Corbijani's throat, and the almost inaudible chuckling from Chow, who was standing just inside the front door. "What have you done to my floor?" Gao said as he rushed out of the back office. "I'll pay to have it restored," Kayla said dismissively. "And who are you?" Gao Run sneered. "That's my Tej mare," Cyan thought to her playfully. "It's Kayla time, for now, but soon." Kayla thought back as she turned to look toward the door. "Chow," Kayla said with a warm smile, "you may announce my arrival now." Chow bobbed his massive head, then spoke in a booming voice, "Lady Darkseid has arrived." The shocked looks on the customers' faces were replaced with bored expressions, as they moved their tables and chairs back where they belonged and returned to their meals. Gao Run lowered his head as he approached Kayla. "Lady Darkseid," he said quietly, "I need to discuss something with you. Would you please come with me? I was hoping to have a nice dinner while giving Corbijani some time to reconsider his attitude. I'll release him from the floor after he's feeling more agreeable. I would be happy to have you served in the private dining room," Gao Run said, and then leaned in and whispered, "I must insist, Kayla." She stiffened at the mention of her name. "I brought a new friend," she said softly. "I'd like to bring them along. Just don't call me that again." "As you wish," Gao Run grinned as he glanced toward Cyan's table. "No," Kayla whispered. "I'm not talking about her. I'm talking about Hai. Where are you?" Kayla thought to Shinji. Shinji stepped out from behind Chow and smiled weakly. "Him," Kayla said quietly. "If you insist," Gao Run said with a curious look in his eyes. "I do. We'll be eating in the VIP room," she thought to Shinji. "Come on. It's safe now." Shinji skirted along the edge of the room as he approached her side. "That jolt I sent through his teeth should paralyze his poison sacs for hours," Kayla said calmly. Her tails trailed behind them as they followed Gao Run through the back door, past the kitchen, down the back hall, and into the private dining room. Gao Run's long, slender arms hung low by his sides, with his knuckles nearly resting on the floor. He hunched forward no matter how straight he attempted to stand. The long table that had been there when she'd been here last had been replaced with a smaller table and 4 chairs. It had a simple white tablecloth and a candle in its center. The room was dimly lit. It was a far more intimate setting than it had once been. "Please, sit," Gao Run insisted. "It's okay," Kayla reassured Shinji as she took her seat. He sat across from her without saying a word. Gao Run studied him for a moment before speaking to her. "I know Thalu is dead, and you have inherited her ship. I also know what that means. You have returned from Midguard. None of this surprises me." "Then what does? Is it my new look?" Kayla asked. "That was unexpected," he said. "More so that it was not foreseen by Labarth. Yet, this is not the reason I insisted on this little chat." "Well, why then?" she asked. "You return and challenge my master for control of the first branch. I'm not fool enough to make threats. You are no longer the child I sent to the Elderon home world. However, you need my support. As long as your goals align with mine, I am yours to command, but obedience must be earned. That being said, tell me, what do you hope to achieve? I'm planning to kill Ruku Har and all of his clones. I will need all of the Ravenhawk clones killed on the same day as I arrive to kill the true Rukuer. Ambitious, Gao Run said with a grin. It's a shame that he killed your aunt and took her place. I know this to be true, but without proof, I cannot help you. Can you prove that Ruku Har has seized control? You were wrong when you said Raven 1 would be waiting for me. Make no mistake, that was no prediction of mine. If it's proof you want, I have the preserved head of Raven 11 in cold storage. How does that prove that the general has been compromised? Clones are made at Farpoint, Kayla explained. The station never makes just a single clone. There are always two. The sample I have on the ship has red eyes, which means there is a second somewhere. Hishtel Vaughn would be the second? If you were right when we last spoke, then yes. I'll know when I go to speak with the general. If it's not him, then I'll simply leave. It must be done before he is able to consolidate his power base. Gao Run nodded. When do you wish to enact your plans, Lady Darkseid? I'm having new armor made. Give me to the end of the month. Gao Run's eyes widened. Sooner than I would have expected. Be warned, Ruku Har is far stronger than his clones. You may need help. Shinji was looking back and forth between them as they spoke. He was clearly lost. You will have my support, Gao Run said with a crooked grin. So, what will become of my old master? Once he agrees to free his hostages, I will allow him to return to Tazalum to lead his rebellion. What hostages? Thallo's sister, among others. Gao Run bobbed his head. You must seek audience with Killer Lime if you seek his station for yourself. Contact her for me. I look forward to seeing her again. In the meantime, I'd like for you to fill the power vacuum. Am I speaking for Lady Darkseid, or? Kayla considered for a moment before answering. Tell her Lady Darkseid would like to meet her at Alliance Arms at her earliest convenience. I'm sure Bruja would love to see her as well. I will send a server in a few moments, Gao Run said, but first, may I offer Lady Darkseid one last bit of advice? Go ahead, Kayla said. Your former name is dead now. You must find a new one, lest someone else uncover your secret. Kayla nodded slowly. Gao Run slid open a wall panel and brought them each a menu. Enjoy your dinner, he said with a bow as he backed out of the room and closed the door. Sorry about all that, Kayla said to Shinji with a shrug. Business before pleasure. I tried not to pay attention, he said softly. What's wrong? She asked. He seemed to be looking anywhere but at her. Did the fight upset you? I know it was dangerous, but it was something that had to be done. I saw that you hid behind Chao. That was smart thinking. I hid behind him because I was terrified, Shinji said as he stared down at his closed menu. I've never seen a fight like that before. I know Korbajani can be intimidating, but it turned out fine. I wasn't hurt and it ended quickly, Kayla said with a smile. I thought he was scary, Shinji said just above a whisper. I was sure he was going to kill you. Yes, I was worried about you, but what I saw terrified me. Kayla sighed. He's no threat right now, and after being beaten so soundly. He was scary, Shinji interrupted, but you were terrifying. You can slide in and out of direct telepathic communication, you can use insanely powerful Mystrionics abilities without any preparation, you can react faster than a top-rated Chalig assassin, and you make it look easy. The floor was Cyan's handiwork, but pointing that out could make him feel even more inadequate, so she saw no benefit to mentioning it. The way you moved and reacted, Shinji continued, that had to be Kobitange. I know people with 2 talents, but 3? I don't even know what to call what you did back there. Is there even a name for it? Kayla lowered her head. I was trained as a battle mage. It allows me to combine all of my abilities into a single fighting style. The floor? Some lamentics are strong enough. Maybe, but then there's what you did at the mall, Shinji said while trembling. Are you saying there are other people that can do what you did back there? Not once my master dies, Kayla said sadly. That will be a little over 2 years from now, and there's nothing I can do to prevent it. They rate our talents as lesser, minor, major, or greater, Shinji said. My mental talent was rated greater. I've heard of people with 2 majors, or a greater and a minor. What's your rating? It's like you're on a completely different metric than the rest of us. There was a knock at the door. We're not ready, Kayla said and waited until the server had walked away. Please tell me. When I was younger, she said softly, I was lied to about my actual capabilities. If you want to know what my current ratings would be, I'll tell you, but only if you do me a favor first. What do you want me to do? He asked fearfully as he stared down at the tablecloth. Look at me, Kayla yelled, tears streaming down her face, and slammed her hands on the table. He cowered as he heard her strike the table. Please, she sobbed, just look at me. I've had so many people reject me, and treat me like I'm a monster. Cyan didn't, Kivaza's thoughts rumbled up from the depths of her mind. You're not helping, Kayla thought angrily and forcefully enough that Shinji could overhear the thought. I'm sorry, he said without looking up. I know I can be scary. Sometimes I even scare myself. I've done so many things that can't be undone. Don't turn this into one of those things. Korbajani made someone I considered a friend betray me. He forced my friend to cut something out of my head because he wanted my power. He would have had her sister killed if she didn't do what he told her to. Because of those orders, he got my friend killed. It nearly got me killed, too. Shinji sat silently, still looking down at the table. Maybe I am a monster, Kayla wept. Everyone wants to control me, use me, like a puppet. I just want to be happy. I want to stop having to fight. I want to find a way to wash all this blood off my hands. I just want someone, anyone, to see there's still some light inside me. The worst part is that I actually like who I am inside, but that's not who they want me to be. I'm tired of people trying to force me to be their pet monster. Shinji looked up at her with tears in his eyes. Say something, she begged through her sobs, please. He wiped his eyes, and in a wavering voice said, would you be my pet monster? I promise I'll take good care of you, and never ask you to do anything you don't want to do. Kayla crawled over the table, wrapped her arms around him, and wept uncontrollably on his shoulder until she could cry no more. It had been a long time since the server had last checked on them. Kayla walked over to the door and slowly opened it. Gao Run was sitting in a chair watching the door. Hey, Kayla said meekly, thank you for giving us some privacy. Lady Darkseid, we've made arrangements for your stay here. I recommend in the future, you use them accordingly, Gao Run said in an unusually loud and stern tone. If you are done with your strange intercourse ritual, I would be delighted to have one of our wait staff serve you. Kayla stammered, but we weren't. Gao Run tilted his head and widened one eye. Kayla nodded, smiled, and closed the door. Is that what he thinks we were doing? Shinji asked. No, she said with a smile, he just didn't want to expose my moment of weakness. We have to uphold the image that comes with the name Lady Darkseid. Their server was a Pharisine, a small reptilian species which had always reminded Kayla of geckos. They kept the conversation light over the course of dinner. It was of the high quality Kayla had come to expect from Gestajos. After they finished, Gao Run arrived with a packet containing keys and directions to the house which had been set aside for her to use during her stay. The Chalig had been removed from the building by the time Kayla didn't care enough to investigate the matter. She was just happy, after a long day, to sit back and relax while Shinji drove her to her new home, which came complete with a mountaintop view of the city. After the siege of Hyrule, the mansion had been liberated from a former top-level government official, shortly after the liberation of the official's head from their neck. After the emotional turmoil of the day, Kayla just couldn't keep her eyes open. She was fast asleep long before they reached the house.